You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host, Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm sitting down with founder of Pink Week and social impact coordinator at Lemonade, an insurtech company driven by social good. Taking an interest in the hardships of the world around her for as long as she could remember, it wasn't until the passing of her mother to breast cancer that she decided to dip her toes into humanitarian work by founding Pink Week. Aiming to raise awareness within the younger generation, her campaign went from strength to strength, raising thousands of pounds over the years. Leaving her first project behind after graduating university, she packed her bags to continue making an impact in Tel Aviv, working for an insurtech company with giving back at its core. Sharing her thoughts on the value of campaigning within Gen Z demographics and how the pandemic has affected fundraising for charity, here's what it's like to be Nina Rauch. Welcome, Nina. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. How I like to get things started is to just backtrack a bit, go all the way back to where it all began, and ask you what it was like for you growing up and where you're from.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be talking to you as well. I grew up in London and born and raised here until I moved to Israel around 2 years ago. But until then, I'd only lived in London.
Wow, Israel must be quite the experience, and we'll definitely get stuck into that a bit later on. But do you remember maybe the first time you felt that you had an interest in more humanitarian work? Was it always something that was ingrained in you, or how did that interest come about?
Yeah, I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I think from a very young age, I had this I really always felt quite sad when I saw bad things happening to people. Like, even if I saw like a kid on the street being shouted at by his mom, it used to really upset me. So I think I kind of felt that I definitely wanted or kind of had an interest in helping people from a young age. But it really developed more when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, because it directly impacted me, which I think is, it sounds like selfish, but I think it's the first entry into doing good, because you understand how much, the organizations that you want to support can help people because you see it firsthand. So I think that's, usually the first time someone really realizes how much of an impact they can make is when something makes an impact on them. I reckon around the age of 13 when she was diagnosed when I was much younger, when I was around 10. That's when I first started to become aware of kind of social impact and what's out there. And also my mom raised a lot of money for charity. She was quite an activist. So I think definitely inspired by her.
Yeah, first of all, I'm very sorry to hear that your mom had to go through that in the first place. But I completely agree with you how I feel like things don't really impact you until they're on your doorstep or you're aware, but you can never be fully understanding until it's happening to you. And I suppose you took that a step further with Pink Week, which was an incredible initiative that you set up. So can you take me back to the very early days, the idea, and how you got it off the ground?
Yes, definitely. So I started it when I was around 16. I was at an all-girls school. I had lost my mum to breast cancer about 3 years earlier, and I really felt that there should be more awareness of the disease amongst young people. It's very well known, but I think that most nonprofits and most fundraisers target kind of the older generations because that's when breast cancer becomes more lethal. But I had this mindset that if you could be aware of it from a younger age, you could protect yourself, you could be more conscious of checking, there would just be less of a taboo around it. And I thought that like my small girls' school was kind of like a microcosm of the fact that if it wasn't even being spoken about at all girls' schools, there's no chance it's going to be spoken about at like mixed schools or anything else. So I thought it was the best place to start. And I basically just had the idea to do one day of fundraising. It wasn't a whole week. We did a cake sale. We sold pink like baked goods, and I sold badges to everybody in the school. And I think we raised around £1,000. And that kind of generated the idea that you could actually make a significant amount from minor donations and from younger, generations, from teens, from Gen Z, which had been disregarded until that point. And so we did it in my final 2 years of school. And then when I came to university, it started to really grow, and I found a community of others who wanted to support it. And we turned it from one day. I remember I made I printed out posters when I was in sixth form, and it was just Pink Day. And then when I got to university, I was like, maybe we can do a whole week of events, really kind of integrate it into the university calendar. And I found people that wanted to do it with me. And so that's really how it got started.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I mean, over the years, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, have you been doing it for 5 years now? Is that?
Um, yeah, I would say around 5, 6 years. I think it really got properly started when I was in university, but the idea definitely happened before. But yeah, it's around 5 to 6 years.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the amount you've raised and, the awareness. And I love the approach you're taking, that younger people can get involved in charity and do care about it as well, because I feel like there's maybe a little bit stigma is probably not the right word, but just an expectation that Gen Z or the younger generations don't really care. So
For
how have you
sure.
found, I suppose, navigating with that concept, and what's your experience been like in that side of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very logical preconception to not target younger generations for fundraising because we just have less money. Like when
Yeah,
you're a
so
student,
true.
and like it makes a lot of sense. So I completely understand a charity's approach. Like if you're a student and you know already saving so much, you don't have a lot of extra money to spend. I think that you have to prioritize yourself, and you're not going to try and make sure that you donate to charity because you simply don't have the funds. But what Pink Week was trying to argue is that we're not asking for a huge donation. In fact, like you could give between £1 or £5 for an event, or £20 plus, which is a larger donation, and you can still create a larger overall impact. So if you can just target more young people with smaller donations, you can have the same impact. And also then you have kind of donors for life because you've engaged them from a younger age, so they can remain invested and dedicated to the organization. And when they become older and hopefully have salaries of their own and jobs, they might prioritize donating to this organization.
Yeah, that's so true. I think I didn't even think about the, I suppose, longevity in starting with younger generations as they move up, to be committed to a cause that means a lot to them. That actually makes a lot of sense when you put it like that. And so I suppose for anyone that hasn't ever heard of Pink Week, how did it evolve then from going from, what you started in school to that day to then implementing the Pink Week in university? How did the actual, I suppose, physical event evolve over the years?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first thing was I had an amazing group of friends and teammates around me at university. One of my best friends now, she's the co-founder. Her name is Kate Davis. She has amazing ideas. She always thinks big, and she's able to implement them with logic, which is something that I'm always lacking. Like I would have really big ideas, but you need common sense to make them happen. So what we wanted to do was make a week of events that raised awareness for breast cancer in different ways. So we alternated between paid and free events. The first event would be kind of a free health class, yoga, something like that. Then the day after, we did like a paid evening session, maybe an awareness session. We invited doctors to speak and educators and fundraisers. Then we did an awareness day, the Wear Pink Wednesday, which, Mean Girls inspired.
Oh, love
So that was
it.
that's completely free, just donation based, and really just focusing on awareness and making sure to get people up to sign up to the Copperfield Check Yourself campaign. They send you a monthly text reminding you to check yourself. So we kind of stood outside on campus and tried to get many signatures as possible. And then the day after, we would do another paid event, so maybe a small evening in a bar, something like that. And we would finish off with a larger event where the tickets were more expensive, so obviously catered to like higher end donations and maybe people who were able to spend or designate their money towards that, but always making sure there was a balance between free and paid events. And then I just think it managed to catch on, and it grew and spread to other universities just because the idea was so simple and really easy to replicate. It didn't take a lot of thought, and we had a system in place, and we managed to tap into a lot of trends. So I think it was in like my first year uni that like Deliciously Ella became really big, and
Oh
kind
yeah.
of healthy eating and eating clean. And so we did vegan supper clubs and things like that that were like trendy and popular. And we made like recipe books and those kind of things. You know, once you put it online, it's really easy for people to pick up and get inspired by. So I think that's how it spread so quickly.
Yeah, first of all, I'm so impressed that you even managed to get that off the ground in first year of uni, because I don't know what I was doing in first year, but it wasn't anything as important as that. um,
You were
and so,
probably you were probably working, which was actually a better thing to be doing. You're probably
well,
studying.
I mean, I'd like to say that, but I'm not sure if that was actually the case. um, and so, I guess on that note, because obviously, I think it's such an amazing thing to be working with like causes and humanitarian and social impact work. But I think what a lot of people, sorry, forget with founders of these kind of things is you're also an entrepreneur at the same time. You know, you put in as many hours and work to get this going as, say, an entrepreneur of a I don't know, just a generic business. So how did you find that balance between university, making sure that you're always getting the message of the cause across, but then also balancing being a first-time entrepreneur yourself? Was it stressful ever? How was it?
Yeah, I think it definitely was stressful. I really did struggle to find a balance at first. I just couldn't kind of understand how I could balance my passion because I wanted to dedicate as much time as I could to Pink Week, but also couldn't forget that I was in uni and I had to get a degree and get by.
Yeah.
So I think at first I just threw myself way too much into Pink Week and I forgot about studying and all the other things that come together with university experience. But the more that we did it and the more, you know, people joined and the bigger the teams became and the committees and, you know, co-founders, I was able to find that balance a lot more. But I think it's definitely hard. You have to practice self-control because you're very passionate about something. So you want to do as much as you can, but you also need to look after self, you know, your mental health, self-care, like especially dealing with topics like breast cancer awareness. You know, if you have a personal relationship to it, it can be quite overwhelming.
Yeah, of course. And so I suppose you saw a lot of success with Pink Week. It was all going really well, and you'd really, I'm guessing here, established a really good rhythm with how it all operated. But as you said earlier, this was kind of your entry into humanitarian work, and you've done so much more since then. So, what happened next for you, and what was it like leaving Pink Week a little bit behind, or I don't know if you're still involved now, but you know, kind of handing over the reins whilst you went to work on something else?
Yeah, definitely. I think it was a very natural progression. I think it was ready, like I felt it was time for me to leave it behind. And also, like I said, it was kind of overwhelming, constantly working around breast cancer awareness. I needed to kind of take a step away from it. So after I graduated, I worked for WaterAid, which is a water nonprofit. It's an incredible organization. I worked for them based out of the UK, and I really loved it. But I felt that I wasn't able to emulate that same kind of engagement with younger generations as I was with Pink Week, which makes sense because when you're in university, you're surrounded by it. And I felt slightly detached from that community, working for nonprofits who obviously were targeting an older, you know, older generations because there's larger donations coming in, and that makes perfect sense. So I ended up looking at the possibility of not working for a nonprofit anymore, but moving into the benefit corporation space, working for a B Corp, which is a business that is socially impactful. It's part of its legal mission to do good. And that's how I ended up with Lemonade, which is an insurtech. And they have a Lemonade Give Back, which is how they support amazing nonprofits who are doing good in the world. Most traditional insurance companies will keep kind of the unclaimed premiums left over at the end of the year as profit, but Lemonade doesn't. Instead, once a year during the Lemonade Give Back, they donate leftover dollars to nonprofit partners chosen by customers. And that really felt to me like a natural transition because I suddenly could see how you could create impact on a global scale, on a much larger scale for, you know, young professionals in a really cool way, but not directly from a nonprofit, from a different angle. And it was definitely where I felt, you know, I could do my best work.
Yeah, and that's where you are now, right? As a social
Yeah,
impact coordinator. Yeah, is that
exactly. Yeah.
So I know that, well, I'm pretty sure this job for you is in Tel Aviv in Israel.
Yeah.
S-
Yeah.
So can you tell me about that move, what it was like? I'm sure it was so different, but also such a cool experience. So as a little bit of a side note from the physical work that you were doing in your life, what was that move or shift like for you?
It was definitely hard. I mean, I was really excited to move at first. I had always wanted to do something a bit different and try a different experience and live somewhere that wasn't London. And I loved it. I think it got kind of tricky this year with Corona, which I think
Oh, of
everybody has been
course.
struggling. But
Yeah.
just like being away from family is hard. So I actually came back to London for the last few months. Um, but yeah, no, I really love living in Tel Aviv. It's a super exciting place to be as a young person. There's a great culture there, and especially working in the startup community. There's so many startups coming out of Israel, so it was really exciting.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. I love travel, and then to hear where you're somewhere so different, it must be so cool. So I'd be interested to know, I suppose, just from your knowledge in this sector and in this field, um, how you would have predicted charities would be, or charities, nonprofits would be performing in, as you said, this era of COVID. Do you think that they got
Mm.
hit a lot by the virus, with people kind of experiencing their own, say, financial difficulties in terms of donations, or just their own struggles so close to home that they maybe had a bit of compassion fatigue, that they just couldn't, invest themselves in the charities as they would have before?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's such a delicate balance because I read somewhere the other day, and I can't remember exactly where, but I can try and find the source, that the charity sector lost a third of its income every single day at the height of lockdown, because I think it was one of the first times that everybody was universally suffering. I mean, in the first time in a long time, people were in furlough, people were losing jobs, and that idea of suddenly reserving money or putting it aside for somebody less fortunate is a lot more complicated when you suddenly feel a lot less fortunate. So I can imagine, I mean, from what I've been seeing, the trends that we've been reading about, they're definitely being hit very hard. I think you're right. People do feel compassion. I know there was a big drive to support coronavirus and like COVID-19 charities when it first started to kick off. At Lemonade, for example, we offered our users the opportunity to donate to Direct Relief, or to choose Direct Relief as their give back partner, which is a big COVID-19 charity. But I do think that it really was the first time in a long time that people felt that, this wasn't the ideal time to be donating their money to charity. And I think that makes perfect sense. And, charities need to adapt to that. But on the other hand, something that I read that was really interesting is that it's forcing charities to kind of embrace digital trends, which they've moved away from, or they haven't really embraced in the past, because charities are less tech driven on the whole, and they're more established organizations. So kind of waking up to that idea that they do need to be in tune with tech trends and digitalized media, online, social media, I think is really important. And also virtual volunteering events. It's made it a possibility for somebody to volunteer their skills, their knowledge from a flight away or a different country. So that's cool. That's a different angle of looking at it.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe it's opened a lot of them up to extra fundraising avenues or something like that they weren't aware of before. But I was just so interested to hear from inside, what you were seeing happening with everything, because I can imagine it's such a hard time for charities and nonprofits at the moment as well.
It's definitely not a good fundraising climate. Like I can
Yeah,
imagine
yeah, yeah.
it's like a really difficult time to ask people for money because everybody is feeling it. So
But yeah, so the next thing I'd be so interested to hear about is, if you wouldn't mind, just, I'm not going to ask you, from 9 a.m. you do this, but what is the day in the life of a social impact coordinator like?
yeah, definitely. So pretty busy.
I could
Trying to
imagine.
keep on top of, especially this year. I think there's just been so many opportunities, not even opportunities, so many times where it's so important to react to what's happening in the world. I mean, we've seen kind of event after event that requires a social impact response. So definitely making sure to keep on top of world events and see if there's a fitting response that Lemonade should be taking, or a stance, or a position that we should be holding. I think you saw a lot of companies stepping up and doing that over the course of the year. So I think it's really important for brands to take stands now.
Yeah.
And it's not a year to be complacent. It's not a year to be silent. And like maybe in the past, you could have let these things kind of, you could have ignored these things as a brand. But I think nowadays consumers are so smart into it. You can't. Like it's almost impossible, because we have to think very ethically about where we spend our money in such strange times. So I would say most important thing is to kind of notice the trends that are happening in the world, making sure that as a brand you are taking a stand, that you're listening to your consumers and what they care about. I deal with a lot of give back requests, so our policyholders always send in charities that they're suggesting. I want to make sure to reply to every single policyholder that submits a request, because I think it's really important that if they've made the effort to, if they've made the effort to suggest a cause, that I'm able to, respond to them and, pay attention to the charity that they've suggested, because it's usually very personal. Then like work within the company to see if there's any social impact opportunities, for example, running ad campaigns with our nonprofits, Instagram campaigns with our nonprofits. We have an amazing Instagram where we collaborate with artists and we commission work with our nonprofits. So yeah, just making sure that Lemonade is as socially impactful as it can be, and is, on the right side of history as much as it can be.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely sounds like you are busy from the moment you walk into the office, that's for sure. But it sounds like it's a really rewarding space to work in, and exciting as well, if you've got so much things going on to juggle. And I know this is kind of a hard question to answer, because I mean, we don't even know what's happening tomorrow, let alone in a week from now or a month. But if you did have to look into the next 5 years, I know that sounds like such an interview question. What's your 5-year plan? I don't mean like that, but where do you see yourself moving to, or do you see maybe another Pink Week type of a situation arising for you, where you want to get stuck back in on the entrepreneurial side of it, or yeah, where do you see yourself going?
I love Lemonade. I really love the organized like I do. I love the company. I love what they stand for. I love the way they're kind of revolutionizing how we give back. So I'd like to stay with them as long as possible. That would be my very clear plan, because I do think that the way things are continuing, the non-profit and the for-profit sector will just keep meeting at this intersection, and then eventually, social impact will be baked into every for-profit company. So to already be working for a company that's ahead of that curve and has just made sure to be good from the very beginning, like, such a privilege. And yeah, I don't want to go anywhere else.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's amazing to have found a workspace that you're so
Yeah.
passionate about and that you love so much. I think that's the goal for everyone, really. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so I only have 2 more questions for you, and then I'm going to let you go. But I'd be really curious to know your take on this, because you experienced, building something from scratch and turning it into a success, and then now you found success in your job in a different way. So, what does that word success mean to you, and how does it, I guess, translate into your life?
I think success for me, um, is really feeling good and happy with your work. And I think that's why Lemonade and Pink Week don't seem disconnected at all, but seem like a very natural transition, because in both roles, I feel like I'm making an impact. And that's what makes me feel happy. Like, it is super cliche, I said at the beginning, but it's really what makes me feel good. And so if you can do that, that's successful.
No, I love that. And I think, it makes so much sense. And sometimes cliches are cliches because they just make sense with people. So,
For
um,
sure.
I,
Exactly.
yeah, I get 100% where you're coming from. And then just to round everything off, I like to ask this to everyone. If I put your 10-year-old self in front of you today, having been through everything you've been through and all of the amazing work that you've done, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd give that 10-year-old self moving forward?
Oh, that's such a nice question. I was actually I was really shy when I was a kid. I was super shy. I think I was not very confident. People used to clap when I spoke in primary school because I
Oh.
was like I was really quiet. So I think that there's a lot of pressure on kids to be successful and loud and like front of the class from an early age. And I really believe in everyone doing things at their own pace. So I think be patient, go with the flow, and good things will come. That's probably the advice I would have given.
Yeah, I love that. That's great pieces of advice. And now I'm just imagining you as a 10-year-old in your primary school classroom. So
Yeah.
cute. um, well, I just wanted to take this time to thank you so much for giving up your afternoon to share your story.
Of
It's been so
course.
interesting chatting. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Seriously, I really enjoyed it. This was such a fun way to spend an afternoon.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share, and leave a comment if you like what you hear, and don't forget to follow @WhatIt'sLikePod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Nina and her work, visit the links provided in the show notes. I'll be back on Monday with more inspiring stories, but for now, this has been What It's Like with Luce.